Hey everybody, welcome back to Movies You Missed Podcast, episode 144. Hopefully you enjoyed last week's entertaining episode of Birdcage and Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. We're keeping the comedy rolling through the first few weeks of 2025. I'm very excited for this episode, particularly for my pick. And Vee, I hadn't seen yours, and I think this is another episode where we had not seen each other's picks.
That's true, John. I hadn't seen your pick before either.
Sweet. So we'll get into those in just a little bit, but if you are new to Movies You Missed Podcast in the year 2025, welcome to Movies You Missed Podcast. We are John and Vee, film industry veterans, 25 years collectively in the beautiful entertainment industry, and we've also been friends for at least 26 plus years since we are getting closer to the age that we are short from. The reason you're here is hopefully because you love movies like us, and we here at Movies You Missed Podcast don't spoil any of the movies we discuss or the movies we see in theaters or on streaming, and we also like to bring up movies that have been forgotten, movies that kind of fell through the radar, and movies that we just want to revisit and remind you as an audience that they exist. Oh, so I'm curious, Vee, how are you today after all that?
I'm doing really well today, John. I love episodes where we haven't seen each other's movies before. This is a special one because we hadn't done that in a couple weeks, actually.
It has been a little while, yeah, so looking forward to getting into both of these movies and the BTS and all that good stuff. And like I said, everybody, here at Movies You Missed Podcast, we do not spoil the movies that we've seen in theaters or on streaming this week. And over the last week, I have watched a handful of movies. Vee, I'm not sure if you've seen as many as I have, though.
I don't know if anybody's seen as many as you have.
I'm actually very curious to know who has seen more than me over the last 7 days. Should we jump right into it?
I think we should.
All right, great. Let's jump right into the first movie that I started my week off with. I'm going to try and limit these movies each to about a minute and a half each. I started my week with Conclave, starring John Lithgow and Ralph Fiennes.
God damn it, I'm so jealous that you watched that movie.
Great movie. I will be honest with you. The soundtrack was fantastic. The acting is fantastic. However, I will say the final 10 minutes of the movie really took me out of it. Other than that, it is a great movie. It is definitely worth watching. I would give it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Okay, and did you stream that?
I did stream that one, yes.
And I like how every week you change the format of your grading system. So sometimes it's out of 10, other times you give it an A, B, C, D, or F rating, and this week's it's out of 5. I'm liking it.
Yeah, I went with the 5s this time. I feel like 10 is a little bit too generous for some of these movies, but I don't know. I just kind of felt like going with the 5 grading scale this time.
Hey, no matter the scale, you always standardize it, so it's fine.
Very, very true. The second film I watched was the Demi Moore, Margaret Qualley, The Substance.
Ooh, a lot of buzz around that film.
A lot of buzz around that film, indeed. I had a great time with it. I will say that it did go about 10 minutes too long for me, including my wife. My wife did say that it is one of the most disturbing and disgusting movies she's ever seen.
Awesome.
And that's saying a lot because my wife walked out of the time that her and I were watching Trainspotting together.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that The Substance is great. Demi Moore was fan-fucking-tastic. This is a body horror film like no other. Completely took me on a different route than I thought it would go, and I will be honest with you, I'm completely in full support of Demi Moore winning that Golden Globe.
Awesome.
Yes, highly recommend. The third movie I watched was the last, well, as we know of anyway, the last Clint Eastwood-directed film starring Nicholas Hoult and Toni Collette and J.K. Simmons, Juror Number 2.
Kiefer Sutherland's in that movie, too.
That's right, he absolutely is. Juror Number 2 was miscast in so many different ways. Ooh. However, the movie was all right. I will say a good hour of the almost 2 hours was very good. This is going to likely be on my movies you could miss list.
That's a bummer considering it's Clint Eastwood and his last film.
Yeah, I hope it's not his last, but something tells me it is based on the way that this movie went. He had nothing to do with the screenplay, but it just, there was just, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. There was some, again, I think it was just a miscast situation.
Okay.
After that, I ended up watching an Irish horror film called Oddity.
Haven't heard of it.
A lot of people had not. Scared the living shit out of me.
Ooh.
Some great fucking scares. A really cool story. Not what I expected. I gave this one, I think it was about a 4 out of 5. Highly recommend horror movie. A lot of fun.
Oddity. Huh, okay.
If anybody's heard of it or not, check it out. I believe it's on Shudder. You also might be able to check it out on Amazon Prime.
Okay.
Now, on the same day, because I watched 5 movies in one day...
Oh my God.
Which I'm sure
jealous.
Our audience knows
Purely
I
jealous.
like to do that.
Yeah.
Yes, I love to watch a multitude of movies in one day.
Mm-hmm.
This movie was actually a complete surprise to me. This movie's called Mads. It is a French horror film, a singular shot French horror film.
Ooh, cool.
Actually, my favorite watch of the day, which that day consisted of The Substance, Juror Number 2, Oddity, Mads, and one other one, which I'll get into in a minute.
Okay.
But Mads was absolutely a fucking blast. I loved every minute of it. It was very impressive. We've talked about the singular take movies with Birdman in the past. Mads is a singular take horror movie that absolutely demands an audience. I really hope that everybody that listens to our podcast gives this movie a shot.
Awesome. What streaming service did you watch it on?
I watched it on Amazon Prime, actually with a Mubi connection.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because Amazon, you can add Mubi, MGM Plus, which a lot of our audience may not know about. You can also add Shudder and several other different streaming services to Amazon to kind of, find some new movies. And that's how I found Mads.
Fantastic.
Now, the fifth movie I watched on that day of The Substance, Juror Number 2, Oddity, Mads, was Black Cab, a movie starring Nick Frost, who is our buddy from Shaun of the Dead, which is coming up, and Hot Fuzz. Yeah. This is an okay movie. I would give this one like a 3 out of 5. If I were giving it a grade scale, I'd give it like a C-. It was entertaining enough. Nick Frost plays a bad guy, which is pretty cool, considering majority of the time he plays a comedic character. But an enjoyable watch. I don't think I would tell anybody not to watch it.
I guess he was missing Simon Pegg, huh?
It actually would be interesting to see Simon Pegg in a horror movie. I'd be totally on board with that.
Or as a bad guy.
Definitely as a bad guy. After that, I went to the theater for a few movies. I went and saw Sonic the Hedgehog number 3.
The movie that brought Jim Carrey out of retirement.
Fuck yeah. Oh my gosh. I love the first two. I ended up actually only watching the second one right before I saw this movie that evening. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is a complete blast. If you can see this movie in theaters, please do. This is one of the final movies of 2024 that came out. Give it a shot. I loved it. I had a great time.
Good.
The next day, I went and saw Robert Eggers' My Good Buddy, who I've done 2 films of here on this podcast, of The Witch, which is unfortunately a lost episode, but we will get to it in the future. I also did The Lighthouse 2 years ago. This is the remake of the 1922 gothic horror silent film Nosferatu.
It's not a silent movie, though, right?
No, it is not a silent movie. It is a complete...
Just making sure.
No, it's not a silent movie at all. No, great. No, it's actually a good thing that you asked, because you never know. A lot of people might think so, because the artist several years ago won Best Picture for being a silent film.
And knowing Robert Eggers and how authentic he likes to be, I wouldn't be surprised if he made a silent film, but God damn it, I'm so jealous you've been able to see this film before me.
Well, it is what it is. I will say that this is definitely the best horror film of 2024.
Hell yeah.
I thought my wife was going to want to go with me. She decided that I should go see it and decide if she would like it, because my wife is a big fan of the original 1922 Nosferatu. This movie is awesome. Scary as hell, brutal, gothic. The soundtrack is incredible. Not only is Nicholas Hoult fantastic, Lily Rose Depp, absolutely spectacular.
Wow.
And Aaron Taylor Johnson, awesome. This is a thumbs up movie all across the board. Check this movie out, give it the respect it deserves, and see this movie in theaters before it comes out on streaming.
Well, at least Aaron Taylor Johnson redeemed himself at the end of the year after Craven.
Yeah, when he showed up, it took me about 5 minutes to realize that it was him, because he's authentic accent. Oh, his whole getup was... Yeah, no, you know what? I'm not even going to get into it. See Nosferatu. This is a killer, and no pun intended, awesome, awesome movie.
Can't wait.
After that, I watched a movie called The King Tide, starring Clayne Crawford and Frances Fisher.
Frances Fisher, our friend Frances Fisher?
Our friend Frances Fisher, yes, from Unforgiven and Titanic and several other movies. This movie was a complete surprise to me. I was scrolling through Amazon, and I think it's a part of the Shudder add-on that I added. This is, we don't do spoilers here. If you're looking for something new, watch The King Tide. Very, very cool movie.
Okay.
After that, moving right along.
Keep going.
I did go and see the new Gerard Butler, O'Shea Jackson Jr. Den of Thieves 2, Pantera.
Okay, I loved the original, but I'm very wary of sequels.
Oh, yes, I know you are, and so am I, but this one was a complete blast. I had a great time. I love Gerard Butler, O'Shea Jackson, not only in Straight Outta Compton, but The First Den of Thieves. He's a badass, and this movie is a complete badass sequel to the original Den of Thieves.
Do you remember what I texted you when we saw the trailer to this movie months ago?
Oh, yes, I absolutely do.
Of course I want to watch it. It has hot dirtbag Gerard Butler in it. Because he looks like a dirtbag in the film because he's got that beard and he's all scruffy and dirty looking. It's hot.
And he's gained like 30, 40 pounds.
No, not that much. More like 15 or 20.
Okay, 15 or 20. Now, for those of you that know, here at Movies You Miss Podcast, we do love How Did This Get Made? You guys should check out the latest How Did This Get Made of Dracula 2000 because there might be a little Easter egg that you would very much enjoy.
But hear me out. I love that movie. It's horrible.
Oh, I've never seen Dracula 2000.
Oh my God, it's a humongous guilty pleasure. It's awful. It's legitimately terrible, but I love that movie. And we will totally watch it together the next time I come over because I cannot wait to get your reaction on it.
Oh, I can't either, especially after listening to the How Did This Get Made episode of it.
Johnny Lee Miller's in it.
You absolutely got to listen to it. Oh, yes, when they said Johnny Lee Miller, I'm like, no way Sick Boy is in fucking Dracula 2000. I got to check it out, but I will wait until you come over next time.
Thank you.
Moving right along with the movies that I've watched over the last week, I watched a little horror film called Out Come the Wolves. 3 friends go out into the woods and decide to go hunting, and wolves kind of start to take over. This movie's a lot of fun. I had a good time with it. I would say check this movie out if you're looking for something, man against nature type.
Okay.
After that, I watched a movie with Samara Weaving, who is Hugo Weaving's daughter.
I was going to ask,
in the awesome film Ready or Not. This movie is called Azrael.
God damn, I can't wait for Ready or Not to be on the list. I'm so
Ready or
looking
Not
forward to
is
talk about that film.
a awesome flick. Mm-hmm. This movie, Azrael, was actually pretty awesome too. This movie centers around a group of mutes that actually do not speak after the rapture has happened.
Cool.
Yeah, I had a good time with it. I'll be honest. I did not think it was going to be that great, but I put it on and had a really good time. Samara Weaving, she's pretty badass when she doesn't say anything, and not that that doesn't mean anything against her acting abilities. It's just this movie, similar to Silent Night 2 years ago, very animalistic, very intense, and kind of bloody and fucked up. So I would check it out if you like movies like that. Azrael.
And I just read the news that they're working on the Ready or Not sequel.
I heard the same thing. I'm very excited for that.
Me too.
And moving right along with one of the last movies that I did watch this last week, starring Aubrey Plaza and Macy Stella. This is My Old Ass, which I saw a trailer for several months ago, and I'll pretty much watch anything Aubrey Plaza's in. Aww. I had a good time with this movie. It's not super hilarious, but it's very find-yourself, coming-of-age type of a movie. My wife did not like any of it, but I had a good time with it. I know, I was very surprised, because my wife does love Aubrey Plaza. But this movie was pretty good. I gave it like a 3.8 out of 5. Definitely worth a watch, worth your time. Very sweet movie.
Okay. And condolences to Aubrey Plaza.
Very much so, yes. Our heart goes out to her, and yeah, absolutely. Very, very heartbreaking news. Mm-hmm. And the last movie that I watched over this last week, V, I believe you watched, and I will get into it after you discuss what you thought about it, because my wife and I had opinions about it too.
Ooh, okay. I look forward to that, and thank you for leading me in. And just so our audience, in case they weren't counting on all their fingers and toes, tell them exactly how many movies you watched over the last week.
Oh, I watched 13.
Yeah, you did.
5 in one day, and the rest I went to the theater and spent more time on streaming with as well. And I'm looking forward to this next week because I'm going to begin my week with more theatrical experiences and more streaming experiences as well.
Hey, audience, can you tell that John and I are getting ready to do our 2024 recap episode, and so we're scrambling to watch more films?
Exactly. So, V, I'm curious. Fill us in as to what movies you watched, because I know you didn't watch 13 of them.
Nope. Subtract 10. I only watched 3.
Hey, all right.
But still happy
a good
with
amount,
the movies I watched, and I did enjoy all three of them, so that makes me happy. I'm going to start with a movie that isn't a documentary, because the other two were. I watched the new Michael Keaton, Mila Kunis movie, Goodrich.
Oh, hey, that was on my list of movies to watch, but I did not do it yet.
It's a really good family drama. The first half of the movie, I thought, felt a little too LA for me, the way they were having conversations and the way they referred to their therapists and things like that. It just felt very LA, but the second half of the movie really moved right along. I thought the conversations were really poignant, and the dynamic between Michael Keaton and Mila Kunis really made this movie as good as it was. So I was very happy with it. I definitely recommend it to people who are children of divorce. It all seemed very real to me, and I thought they did a great job. So that's the first movie I saw.
Awesome.
The last two are actually both Netflix documentaries. One is titled Will and Harper, and it's about Will Ferrell and his friend Harper, who was previously an SNL writer, and that's where they met decades ago when they both started on SNL. And Harper has recently transitioned. And she used to love taking lots of road trips across the country and was nervous about what that experience would be like now as a woman, and invited Will Ferrell, her best friend, along to help her with this new experience. And it chronicles their trip, and I thought it was great. I thought the conversations they had were very real, and I think it's a really great, important film for anyone who has a new experience with an LGBT person in their lives or are curious about the kinds of conversations that you might want to have with someone in your life. And on top of that, I just think it's a really wonderful friendship movie. So I think anyone who enjoys road trip films or movies about real friendships, definitely give it a watch. Like I said, it's Will and Harper, and it's on Netflix.
I heard about that. I have not pushed play on that yet, but I will have to do that soon.
Yeah, it's really good. I think the middle part was about 10 minutes too long, but otherwise a great film.
Awesome.
And lastly, I'm going to round this out with talking about a movie that both John and I watched in the same week. I love it when we do that. We should do it more often. Because myself, along with you and your wife, watched the Netflix documentary Return of the King, The Fall and Rise of Elvis Presley. I saw the trailer for this a couple months ago, and I immediately thought of your wife because I know how much Amy loves Elvis. So I gave it a watch the other day and then texted her and was like, oh my God, you need to watch this film because this movie is great. I love how much it dove into Elvis as a person. I think it actually did that better even than Elvis the movie from Baz Luhrmann. And so that part of it, I think it really humanized Elvis even more than the film, which I was really happy to see. I loved everyone that they interviewed for the film. I thought the presentation and the way they edited it was great. I loved the ending. I think this is a really wonderful documentary. It's one of my favorite docs of the whole year. It's definitely an experience for me because I grew up in a household that did not like Elvis at all.
Oh, wow.
My parents are not fans of Elvis. I never listened to him growing up. And so being a fan of his is actually new in just the last decade. So now, because I didn't know much about him before, learning more about what he went through and the type of person he was. Because before, when I was a kid growing up, it was like, okay, yeah, that guy died on a toilet, whatever. You know, he had drug problems and okay. And so I've actually, over the last decade, built up a lot more empathy for him, now learning more and more about who he was as a person. And I thought this documentary was really great. And I thought it's filled in a lot of gaps for me in terms of what he went through. And I like that it purely focused on the 68 special. It doesn't try to tackle too much of the story. I think a lot of times movies and documentaries both have that problem. So that's the last movie I saw this week, Return of the King. And I'm really excited to hear what you and Amy thought about it.
I didn't even know it existed. I had gotten home just the other night. I had gotten home just the other night, and Amy handed me the remote, and she was on Netflix. I think she was watching Monk or something like that for her 9th rewatch of that show with Tony Shalhoub.
Nice.
And I just scrolled over and was like, Return of the King, what is this? And she goes, oh, it's a documentary on Elvis. I'm like, oh, well, we could watch that tonight, or we could go back to watching King of Queens, because we're in the middle of rewatching the sitcom King of Queens. And she was like, okay, cool. So I pushed play on it. And we were like a good 45 minutes in, and I was completely enthralled with the whole thing. I will be honest, there were a couple of people that were interviewed that I was like, who the fuck are these people? But, I whatever. And I'll be honest, I kind of still feel why was Conan O'Brien interviewee for this documentary?
Apparently, he's a humongous, like, crazy Elvis fan. Like, obsessed with Elvis. And I think he's kind of known as an expert in the industry, if I remember correctly.
All right. Well, again, that.
But yeah, that was
fine.
random.
Yeah, it just kind of was like, what? And then, I kind of liked the Billy Corgan bit. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, that was good.
I am a big Smashing Pumpkins fan. And the whole thing, just from beginning of Elvis's birth up until this 68 TV special. And again, I don't know how many people have actually seen the Baz Luhrmann film with Austin Butler, Elvis. I loved that movie. I thought it was fantastic. My wife is an Elvis Presley expert, like knows the songs, the movies, his lifestyle, like how he came up, all this stuff. And we're sitting here on the couch watching this movie, and she is singing the songs, and she's like doing the Elvis like moves and stuff on the couch.
That's cute.
And I'm like, Jesus. Yeah, and watching this documentary, not only along with some of these people I'd never heard of, but with Conan O'Brien, Billy Corgan, Priscilla Presley, Bruce Springsteen, there were just some very poignant interviews. And again, I didn't know a thing about the guy, and I'm just like watching these people just completely gush over him about like who this guy was. And hearing so much more about the Colonel that Tom Hanks plays, who you and I had a battle with, a year and a half ago. But looking at pictures of him in this documentary, the makeup was pretty good on Tom Hanks. They did the makeup pretty good.
We
never hear what Colonel sounds like.
Right. The problem is that no amount of makeup is going to make Tom Hanks disappear. And then top that off with a horrible accent and bad casting.
Completely agree. But yeah, I completely love the movie. The end of the 68 special, Amy's like, is this in the movie? And it started to dawn on me like, yes, it absolutely
Hell
is.
Yeah,
in the
it
movie.
is.
I actually like how they ended it before the tragedy, and all you get the script at the end. I gave it a 5 out of 5. It was the first 5 out of 5 I think of the last 6 months that I was like absolutely magnificent. And the director of the documentary did a great job. The archival footage is fantastic. I've seen a few Elvis movies even before my wife was in my life. There was a bar that I would go to in Hollywood called Velvet Margarita that would only play Elvis movies.
Wait, I think we went to Velvet Margarita once.
We probably did. Yeah,
we totally
down on Cahuenga Boulevard.
Yes, we
walked
did.
in there and there's an Elvis fucking movie playing. It was a great documentary. I absolutely loved it. I would definitely watch it again.
Good. I'm so glad to hear that, and I'm glad we were able to at least watch one movie together this week.
Yeah. So I think we're going to jump right into V's pick this week, and our theme this week is screwball/romantic comedies. And like I said before, we had not seen each other's picks. So I think it's time that we get into a movie shot many, many, many decades ago. V, this is your pick. Start us off with something entertaining.
When we originally started discussing the rom-coms for this episode, you suggested a classic one, a film I hadn't seen before, so in response, I chose this film from even longer ago, in fact.
Yeah.
Mine's even older than yours. And it's funny because I could have picked this movie at a different point in our podcast, which I'll get into in a little bit, but decided to put it here instead. This is a classic film. I love the lead actor in it. I will continue to pick his films. This is the third time, actually, I've picked a film of his. And that is because I'm talking about the 1940 classic, His Girl Friday.
Such an interesting title for this movie, honestly.
Well, I can tell you that a Girl Friday is an assistant who carries out a variety of chores.
Ah, well, there you go. I guess I didn't have that kind of misogynistic mindset when I heard about this movie, because this was set during those times where I guess a woman was a housewife and not so much a working woman.
Not so much a working woman, although this movie is very impressive with how many women are shown to be working in the newsroom, as well as having female reporter. And
solid point.
Friday is actually the name of Robinson Crusoe's native male dog's boy in Daniel Defoe's novel, Robinson Crusoe. So that's actually where the term comes from.
Oh, all right. Well, dropping some history knowledge on me that I did not know before.
Oh, that's okay. I just learned it when researching this film as well, so I'm right there with you.
Oh, sweet. Okay, awesome.
And the reason why I could have picked this film before is that way back in episode 40, we did I know, it was a while ago.
Well, for anybody that didn't see my face, my jaw just dropped because this episode is now over 100 episodes later.
Which is crazy to think.
That is very nuts.
That episode came out almost exactly 2 years ago.
No way.
It came out January 18th of 2023.
Oh, we missed it by 3 days.
That's awesome.
Damn it. That would have been cool, actually.
Yeah, that would have been really cool. Back in episode 40, we did a Jack Lemmon, Billy Wilder special, and we chose The Apartment and The Front Page. The reason I bring that up is that this movie, His Girl Friday, is actually the front page.
Yes. 5 minutes in, I was like, this sounds really familiar.
Really, Hildy, that's a really unique name for a character.
Big time, yeah.
And that's because in the 1930s, Howard Hawks, the director of His Girl Friday, he was hosting a dinner party, and the topic of sharp dialogue was brought up. And he pulled out a copy of The Front Page, a play written several years before that. And the original movie, The Front Page, had been released in 1931.
Yes.
However, a female guest took the role of Hildy, and they started reading the play together. And Howard Hawks realized that the dialogue actually sounded much better with a woman reading it. And so he went and secured the rights to the film from Howard Hughes.
Oh!
And Ben Hetch, the author of The Front Page, the original play, approved the gender change, and the screenplay was written.
That's pretty badass.
Yeah, and so that's how we got His Girl Friday, and that's how it's a little bit of a turn on the front page and its connection back to episode 42 years ago.
Wow. That's pretty cool. I got to say, I did like her quite a bit.
Yes, she's awesome.
She reminded me of Katharine Hepburn for a second. I was like, is that Katharine Hepburn? But it wasn't, obviously.
No, that was Rosalind Russell, and she actually reminded me of Susan Sarandon. I think she looked a lot like her, which is another connection because the front page that was released in 1974, your pick from episode 40, stars Susan Sarandon.
That's right. Yes. Oh, that's right. Yeah, she's the one that Jack Lemmon / Hildy
is
going to be marrying.
Exactly.
That's right. Holy shit. Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And so His Girl Friday, if you haven't seen the front page, that's okay, because I am going to summarize the plot, even though you have previously. Let's see
that's all good.
If my summary holds up to yours. I know you did a great job on that episode.
Oh, thanks.
His Girl Friday, and therefore the front page, centers around Walter Burns, an ambitious editor-in-chief of a New York newspaper, The Morning Post. It's been 4 months since Hildy Johnson has walked into those offices, and so Hildy's return, who happens to be a woman, is quite newsworthy, because it turns out Walter Burns and she were previously married. So immediately this is where we've turned the original story on its head, because in your movie, the original 1931 movie, and the play, Hildy and Walter were just co-workers. They were both men.
Right.
And Hildy had his own fiancé.
Yeah.
Instead, Hildy and Walter are exes, and she is returning to tell him that she's quitting. And the reason she'd been gone for the last 4 months is not only to get a divorce, but to also get some space from Walter. He admits that he was a bad husband, and she told him that he wasn't the right match for her because she wanted more of a home life, and Walter is just a workaholic.
Big time.
And what's surprising about this movie from 1940 is that it starts off at a lightning fast pace and it never lets up. This movie is incredibly quick-witted. It has lightning fast dialogue. You definitely need to keep up with it. And it's pleasantly surprising how fast-paced this movie is, because so many times you automatically think of classic movies being slow burns or having a lot of production to them. And in fact, this is almost, as we talk about a lot, a bottle episode where it takes place almost exclusively in one place.
Mm-hmm.
And you really have to keep up with this movie. So once some good verbal sparring takes place between Walter and Hildy, which is just such a joy to watch, these two have great chemistry together. Rosalind Russell and Cary Grant were fantastic casting choices, even though Rosalind was not the first choice. There were several more famous actresses who were considered for the role, but most of them were out of their contracts, and so Howard Hawks couldn't hire them. But I think that turned out for the best, because Rosalind Russell did a great job. I wish I'd seen her in more films. She had a good career, pretty solid career for many years, but nothing that ever became as famous as this film.
Oh, I don't know the name, and I didn't really recognize her.
Exactly,
so I must have really missed out.
Yeah, when I was looking through her credits, I didn't actually recognize any other movies that she'd been in, or else I would have listed them. But she had solid work for many decades.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So as Walter and Hildy are going back and forth about their marriage and about being exes, I mean, she has a lot of good burns for him, actually.
Oh, yeah, she does.
At one point, early on when they're having this conversation in his office, he said, "Oh, darling, I kept a candle burning for you in the window." And she's like, "Well, I jumped through that window a long time ago."
Yeah, that was good.
And the reason why they're still talking is that it seems like Walter really doesn't want her to leave. He certainly doesn't want her to quit because she's such a talented reporter. But he also talks to her like he really didn't want it to get a divorce, and he really loved her. "I really tried to be at our honeymoon, darling." But
yeah, that was good.
There was a big story that I had to scoop, and you can just tell that work comes first for him and she's tired of it. But at one point in the conversation, he gets a phone call and it turns out that there is an execution that's going to happen the next day. They're hanging a man who killed a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a pretty big story, and so he begs Hildy to cover it for him before she jumps on a train traveling to Albany to marry her new beau. And Walter, being who he is, I mean, he's a very successful newspaper man. Of course he's convincing. Of course he's good at persuading people to do things for him. He, in fact, persuades Hildy to stay until the next morning and cover this execution. And that's what she does. She goes down to the courthouse where all the other reporters are. And I really like this scene because they welcome her with open arms. There wasn't a lot of sexism in this movie in terms of treating her different than any other newspaper man.
Very, very true. Yeah, when I was watching it, it was like, it was a refreshing take, like kind of similar to my movie where when we get into it, my lead actress, she's a working woman too, and she's got a full career. And, a lot of times that was just not heard of. There were women working, but they were secretaries or typists, so they didn't really have a say in just about anything. You think back to Mad Men, there was so many women in the office, but they were literally just typing shit out, and they were secretaries, and they were constantly, the turnover rate was insane. So it was cool to see that in this, especially with the dialogue being very similar, but changed up enough to make it work and flow in a pretty good way.
I'm really glad you think that, and I agree, and I'm surprised at how seamlessly this went, because changing the gender of Hildy, I would have thought that there were more changes to the script that would have had to have been made, but watching the front page with you 2 years ago, and now watching this movie, the script is surprisingly similar.
Oh yeah, very much so.
And when John had watched this movie the other day, he texted me, he's like, "This is the front page." I go, "Oh yeah." I went, "Yes, that's right." And the reason why I didn't pick it is because it was more of a Jack Lemmon, Billy Wilder themed episode back in episode 40, but it could have been paired, and that would have been a fascinating conversation too, having this movie and the front page together so we could really compare them. But I do think this is a good pairing for your pick. I hope you do too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So Walter has, in fact, convinced Hildy to stay just to cover this execution, especially because there's a lot of conversation of whether or not it's the right thing to do is to execute this poor man.
Mm-hmm.
But, like the original front page, Hildy is engaged.
Yeah.
Hildy is engaged to a man named Bruce Baldwin, who is a complete milquetoast.
Milquetoast? I've never heard that term before.
What?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that. I've heard of milk and toast, but not a milk toast.
Oh, okay. So a milquetoast, it actually is spelled differently than you're probably thinking. But
yeah, probably.
Milquetoast is a timid or feeble person. They're pretty.
Okay.
They're bland.
Got it.
Yeah.
I know a couple of milk toasts.
Yes, I'm sure you do. And so Bruce Baldwin is in fact a milquetoast. Wet noodle is another good descriptor.
A wet noodle.
I'm going old school
that
with
one
the
before.
descriptors because
He really is a wet noodle.
movies take place back in the day. Figured it was only appropriate.
Yeah, for sure.
A Magoo. There we go.
There it is. Magoo. I like wet noodle, though. I could totally see so many women in these movies at that era being like, he's such a wet noodle.
Uh-huh, exactly.
Or even like the men, like, oh, come on, what are you doing with him? He's a wet noodle.
Wow, you sound like a newspaper man yourself. That's perfect.
Yeah.
So Bruce Baldwin is Hildy's fiance, and they're supposed to be getting married the next day. And Walter is just so upset about this, especially once he meets him, and he's like, oh, God,
that
really,
scene
Hildy?
cracked me the fuck up.
When he is meeting the old man first.
Yeah, he's like, come on, so you're marrying Hildy, and the old... Yeah, that was a great exchange between all four of them, really.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a case of mistaken identity early on in this film, which is very funny.
And it's done in one take, which is great. There's like no edits, and it's just like,
oh yeah,
damn. It's almost stage play-ish, this movie, but it's done in a way that it definitely still is a movie. The copy that I watched on Amazon Prime was very distorted. I don't know if you had that problem, but it kept like skipping, and yeah, it was unfortunately a bit of a distraction to get through it, but I did. And it was only like an hour and 20 minutes. But yeah, every like 5 minutes it like popped, and I don't know, like the restoration was not very good.
Oh,
but
that's
okay.
horrible. I'm so
It's
sorry.
It's fine. It's from back in the day. It kind of added a little bit of charm to it.
I have a digital copy, and I totally would have shared it with you if I'd have known. I'm so sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, it's fine. It's all good. It was free. I didn't have to pay for it. Ha ha.
Oh, well, that's good. I guess it was worth every penny then.
Yeah, exactly.
So now that Walter has met Bruce, he proceeds to use his little henchman who works for him at the paper to basically make Bruce's life in New York a living hell for the next 24 hours.
That's an understatement.
And that's exactly what he does. And so while Hildy is working very hard to cover this story, Bruce is getting put through the ringer by Walter. And at the backdrop of all this is this case, this execution, and the subsequent escape by Earl Williams, the killer.
Yes.
So this story gets even more sensational for Hildy and Walter. And for the rest of the movie, Hildy is trying to cover this now sensational story because there's an escaped killer. Walter is trying to ruin her impending marriage. And poor Bruce is just along for the ride, getting drugged through the mud the whole time.
Yep.
And so that is His Girl Friday, and this is John's first time ever watching it, so I'm very curious to hear what he thought about it.
Hated it.
No, you didn't.
No, I didn't. No. I laughed. It was good. It was entertaining. Once I figured out that it was a remake of The Front Page, I started thinking back to when I chose The Front Page over 100 episodes ago and exactly almost 2 years ago. And I was like, okay, so I knew that it was a play before on stage, and there was a 1931 version. I didn't know that there was any other versions up until the 1974 color version with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. Because when I did my research, and truthfully, we've done so many episodes here that if I did mention this as a remake in that episode, I'm going to slap myself in the face because I don't remember that at all in the research that I did, or any of the BTS that I was able to find for The Front Page for the 1974 version. But like I said, I liked how it turned itself on its head. It had a lot of the same dialogue, so you gotta really respect that, not only with the filmmakers, but the fact that the original play is a very well respected piece of entertainment. It was cool to see Cary Grant in not only just a comedy, but in a role like that, because with Bringing Up Baby, he's completely just this slapstick guy, and then in Arsenic and Old Lace, same thing. And I think this is the third I might have seen another Cary Grant movie. I truly don't know. But as of today, the three that I can mention are Arsenic and Old Lace, Bringing Up Baby, and now this that I've seen. And there's a GIF or a GIF, however you say it. I don't think anybody knows how to truly say it.
GIF.
Yeah, who knows? GIF, GIF, whatever. There's the Get Out GIF of Cary Grant from this movie. So when I saw it, I was like, aha! Now I know where this comes from, which movie Cary Grant was in that people are using this. It's actually used a lot in one of my bourbon group threads because people are like, no, that bourbon sucks, and then the next thing is to get out. So, yeah. So that was kind of cool.
That GIF.
Yeah, it's great. GIF, whatever. But yeah, it was very entertaining. I had a good time with it. I laughed a lot, and it made me want to rewatch The Front Page because that's one of my favorite movies from the 70s, of course, with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. But it was cool to revisit it, and like I said, I had never heard of Rosalind Russell. She, like I said earlier, reminded me very much of Katharine Hepburn, and yeah, it was a good time. I don't know if I would own it since I already own The Front Page, but it was a good watch, and I'm glad that I was able to check it out. So thanks for having it on the podcast.
Absolutely, my pleasure, and I'm really glad that you enjoyed yourself watching it. And I think it really comes down to preference. What version of The Front Page would you like to watch,
yeah.
right? And I think that's up to each audience member's personal opinion.
I completely agree with that.
As I said earlier, we've done 3 Cary Grant movies so far on this podcast. You picked Arsenic and Old Lace from episode 20, which is probably my favorite Cary Grant role.
Oh yeah, it's just such a great movie.
Although I do love Bringing Up Baby, my pick from episode 95. Man, I might like that more. I just love Cary Grant. I've always been in love with him. I think he is my favorite classic Hollywood heartthrob. Yeah, I will continue
you are
to
a big fan of Cary Grant.
I will continue to pick his movies on this podcast. Let's put it that way.
Oh yeah, why not? Keep it coming.
Yes, because I will also be picking The Philadelphia Story. Speaking of Katharine Hepburn.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I like that one.
That also has Jimmy Stewart in it.
Yes, it does. That one is actually very entertaining. My wife and I watched that one a few years ago for the first time.
Oh,
very
nice.
good, very good movie. Yeah. See, I needed to be reminded. I know I had seen more Cary Grant movies, but the 3 here, especially with my pick of Arsenic and Old Lace, which I was introduced to many, many, many years ago by my mother, that is, I think, my favorite one because of the nostalgia aspect of it.
And all the morbid comedy to it.
And all the crazy morbid comedy. Yeah, it's so funny.
That movie's hilarious. Yes, definitely give episode 20 a listen and then watch Arsenic and Old Lace if you haven't already.
Agreed.
Cary Grant also starred in Monkey Business, To Catch a Thief, An Affair to Remember, North by Northwest.
I have not seen that one.
Oh, a great Alfred Hitchcock movie. I'll probably put it on the list at some point then.
Hell yeah.
And his last film was with Audrey Hepburn, Charade.
Oh, okay. Seen that one too.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You have.
Yes. Charade's cool. My
Yes.
wife is a big charade fan.
Well, you should probably
Might
put it
have
on
to
the
throw
list.
there you
Yeah,
go.
exactly.
Hey.
Ralph Bellamy plays Bruce Baldwin. Now, that name should be semi-familiar to you, Ralph Bellamy.
You'll have to remind me because I don't recognize the name.
He's one of the brothers in Trading Places.
Awesome.
He plays Randolph Duke in Trading Places.
That's great.
Yes. And he was also in Pretty Woman. He plays the owner of the company that Richard Gere tries to take over. And he also has a cameo as Randolph Duke in Coming to America.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I've seen him a bunch then.
You have, yeah. And Howard Hawks, as I mentioned, directed this film. A legendary director back in his day. I've picked a film of his before because he also directed Bringing Up Baby.
Wonderful.
Yes, he also directed the original Scarface, Barbary Coast, The Big Sleep, Red River, Rio Bravo, Monkey Business, another Cary Grant film, and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah, which the famous musical number with her in pink and being surrounded by all of the men in tuxedos on the stairs was reenacted at the Oscars recently when Ryan Gosling sang, "I'm just Ken." I love that homage so much. This is actually one of the first ever films to have characters talk over each other.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, prior to this, movie characters completed their lines before someone else's dialogue was uttered.
That's actually a solid point because oh yeah,
1940.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and I was like, man, there's a lot of overlapping dialogue in this movie, just like in the 1974 version.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, I don't know how sound recordists worked in 1940. I mean, obviously, we have seen Singing in the Rain and how everybody started to start wearing microphones and all that kind of stuff. But that had to have been a real challenge for them back then.
It really was, because most films have dialogue about 90 words a minute. His Girl Friday clocked in at 240 words a minute.
Wow. Damn.
More than 2 times faster than normal.
That's pretty impressive.
And to maintain this fast pace, Howard actually encouraged his cast to add dialogue and ad lib as much as they wanted to.
That's awesome. Hell yeah.
Yeah, especially back in the day. That's actually kind of surprising that a director would say that. And you're right, it was very hard to film because usually movies use boom mics.
Yes.
Howard Hawks decided to use multiple microphones so he could pick up everybody's dialogue, because in a boom mic, you hold it over one actor's head and then you yell cut and you do that scene again and you hold it over the other actor's head so you can get their dialogue. So instead, he used multiple microphones attached to his actors. However, these microphones could not be turned on simultaneously.
Oh, gosh.
So a sound technician had to switch from mic to mic on cue.
Whoa.
Some scenes required as many as 35 switches back and forth between the actors.
Holy shit.
Yes.
That is intense.
Yes, the sound technicians were the real heroes on His Girl Friday.
Fuck yeah.
And
that's incredible.
Yeah, and because of all this technical complication, it led to this film being 7 days behind schedule. In fact, just the restaurant scene itself, when they all go to lunch, took 4 days to film.
Damn. That is a great scene. I love that scene.
Yeah, it is. And
they all order roast beef sandwiches.
And going over made it totally worth it, because the dialogue in this film, like I said, it's still sharp to this day, 85 years later.
85 years. Wow.
Yeah. As I said, Rosalind Russell was not the first choice to play Hildy in this movie. Ginger Rogers and Carole Lombard were both considered, but unfortunately Howard Hawks couldn't get the contracts for them.
Carole Lombard, I definitely recognize that name.
Yeah, she was actually married to Clark Gable, too.
Oh, I wonder how many times he gave a damn. Oh!
God, that was kind of bad.
It was bad. I know it was. That's why I said it.
Well, you know what's crazy, actually, is that Carole Lombard died in a plane crash in 1942 outside of Las Vegas.
Oh, gosh. No way.
Yeah, it was really sad, and Clark Gable was absolutely beside himself, and he drove out to this old saloon that had been there since the late 1800s to wait and hear about what had happened to his wife. I have not only been out to that saloon, because it's still open, it's called the Pioneer, it's one of the oldest saloons still standing, but I've also ridden my dirt bike, my motorcycle, out to the plane crash, and I've seen this plane crash.
No shit.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, it was very sad. Clark Gable really retreated into himself after that. He was absolutely heartbroken when his wife died.
Yeah, I can imagine so.
Yeah. But back to His Girl Friday. Sorry to bring down the mood a little bit, but His Girl Friday was filmed before Carole Lombard's death in 1942, but Rosalind Russell was cast instead. And she was really insecure about it because she had heard about all these big names being considered, and she knew she was far down the list of choices for the female lead. And in the beginning of filming, Howard Hawks just watched her initial scenes with Cary Grant. He didn't make any comment whatsoever. And finally, she just couldn't handle it anymore. She had way too much anxiety. And she told Cary Grant that, oh God, he hates me. He's not liking what I'm doing. And Cary Grant took her aside and said, look, if he didn't like it, he'd tell you. So with that, she got a little bit more confidence and approached Howard Hawks and asked him, do you like what I'm doing? Is this okay? And he said, oh yeah, you just keep pushing him around the way you're doing and and it'll be fine.
Awesome.
He loved that she was going toe-to-toe with Cary Grant, and that really made the movie.
Absolutely. In a movie like this, it definitely works. It's when we get into mine, it's kind of similar. But when actors have free reign like that, we talked about it last week. You know, there's the room for improvisation. There's room for just fucking with each other, and it's all for the sake of the movie. You know, and a lot of times it might be a true stab. But being on set is a completely different world than being off set. And I think that the fact that Howard Hawks just let her rip like that is great. That's awesome. And it seems like Cary Grant had a great time with it too.
Yeah, he absolutely did. They all had a really good time on the production of this film, and it turned out great.
Yes, it most certainly did.
And with all of that improvisation, there are some pretty good insider meta jokes. At one point, Cary Grant said, there's a guy in a taxi down at the court building. He looks just like that movie star. What's his name? Ralph Bellamy.
I must have missed that part, but that's great.
So he calls out Ralph Bellamy by his real name when he's just describing his character, which I thought was great. That was totally ad-libbed by Cary Grant.
That's awesome.
And then Rosalind Russell tells Cary Grant to, go get off your trapeze. Well, that's a reference because Cary Grant used to be an acrobat in his earlier life. And then Cary Grant himself says, listen, the last man that said that to me was Archie Leach just the week before he cut his throat. And Archie Leach is Cary Grant's original name, actually. Cary Grant's stage name.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. Archie Leach is Cary Grant's birth name.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, there's tons of inside jokes because they're all ad-libbing. It just seems like it was a really fun set. Everybody
I can imagine.
seemed to really get along, which is nice to hear because sometimes that doesn't happen. You know, take Singing in the Rain, for example.
Right, yeah.
And the movie is so fast-paced with all of this dialogue that it actually has no music score.
I noticed that. And
can you remember the last movie that I picked that also didn't have a score?
No.
Bringing Up Baby with Cary Grant.
Oh, okay. That one was a little bit ago, too.
Yes, but other than the opening and closing credits, just like Bringing Up Baby, there is no score in His Girl Friday.
Nice.
Yeah. And this
doesn't really need it, you know? It's not like it would really add anything to this.
Well, and it's so fast-paced, it would just be distracting. You need to be able to listen to the dialogue.
Right.
So that is His Girl Friday from 1940, starring Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell. It is one of Quentin Tarantino's favorite films of all time.
No kidding.
Yeah, and it's got the famous Get Out gif that we're going to post this week on social media for you all.
Yes.
And this was John's first time watching it, and I'm so glad you had a great time with it.
I absolutely did.
All right, well, that is my classic rom-com pick for the week, and I believe it's time to stay in New York.
Yeah.
And talk about another Hollywood heartthrob from the Golden Age.
Oh, yes, let's do it. There's actually 2 Hollywood heartthrobs in my pick this week.
Oh, I only noticed the one, and the reason why I know is because my mother was in love with this man back in the day.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. Well, he is a handsome fella, and I will let everybody know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the actor Rock Hudson, who will be in a future pick of mine with Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean, a film called Giant. That's coming up shortly in the year 2025.
Nice.
And V, you said that he looks similar to somebody that we just discussed, if I'm not mistaken.
I think he looks like Cary Grant.
He kind of does, especially when he smiles. He's got a longer face, and he looks a little taller. I totally think they could have been like long-lost brothers or like separated at birth or something like that.
I agree. And doesn't Cary Grant look crazy tall in His Girl Friday?
All of his movies, he looks like he's like 9 feet tall.
I know, and he's only 6 feet.
He's a very tall dude.
No, he's
really?
not. He's only 6 feet
wow.
tall. I think it was just because it was back in the day and everybody else was way shorter.
Yeah. Well, Rock Hudson came in at like 6'4", I think, because in the movie that we're going to discuss right now, Jan, who's played by Doris Day, the other star of this fantastic film, she mentions that the guy that she's starting to kind of fall for is 6'6", so they added like 2 inches to him for whatever reason. But if that's not a hint to any of you that may have seen this movie starring Doris Day, Rock Hudson, Tony Randall, and Thelma Ritter, this is Pillow Talk from 1959, everybody. The story for Pillow Talk is written by Russell Rouse and Clarence Green. Screenplay, Stanley Shapiro. If that's a familiar name, we just discussed him last week as one of the writers of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Mm-hmm.
And Maurice Richlin. This film is directed by Michael Gordon. I love this movie. My wife introduced it to me within the first year of us living together. I remember she found the VHS at Amoeba for like $1, and my wife is a major Doris Day fan. So beyond Pillow Talk, I'm a big fan of Send Me No Flowers, Calamity Jane, Glass Bottom Boat, you name it, I'll pretty much be a fan of it because Doris Day was in it. And she usually sings the theme songs for the movies that she is in, especially for Pillow Talk, which this movie opens up with a great song called Pillow Talk.
I had no idea that was her.
Oh, yes, that is definitely her. Her Christmas album is great, too, and I think Amy's got like 2 or 3 of her vinyls. She was not only a movie star, but she was a recording artist as well. And she is, well, we'll get into it in a little bit. For those of you that have not seen Pillow Talk, this movie is considered one of the first risque sex comedies to come out right before the 60s.
I was shocked by several scenes in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely one of those more risque films. The storyline is quite simple, really. Jan Morrow and Brad Allen both share a party line. A party line was a thing back in the day that the phone companies set up for several people, up to about a dozen, to share a phone line with. That would be a lot cheaper instead of just having your own private line. I remember when I first saw this movie, I asked Amy, I was like, how are they talking to each other? I mean, there's a line very early on where Jan says, oh, you're on the party line all the time. And I was like, babe, I don't even know what the hell this is.
Mm-hmm.
So she explained it to me, and I did a little bit of research just so I could correctly describe it for those of you that may not know what a party line is. It's very fascinating. It was actually really popular after World War II in Europe and in the U.S., and like I said, up to about a dozen people were on this one single phone line. They each had their own specific ringtone also. So if it was like me calling V on our party line, they would be a different ringtone than if somebody else was calling, a neighbor of mine. And the crazy thing, too, about the party lines is they weren't in the same building. And I'm sure you noticed that at one point when watching this movie.
Yeah, that's what confused me because I was like, oh, maybe they're roommates and so they're sharing the phone, and that's what I thought originally.
Oh, yeah.
And then,
that makes sense. I can see that.
Yeah, and then I was like, okay, so this is an apartment building and they share lines. Okay, that makes more sense. And then when her boyfriend comes over, I'm sure you're going to talk about it, but when her boyfriend comes over and doesn't recognize the building, I was like, wait a minute, so Rock Hudson is a completely different building too? What is going on? I've never heard of a party line. I'm so glad you're describing it.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. It was, again, big thing, and it's hilarious because this movie does open up with a triple screen cut. It's not just a split screen. And this film was also done in CinemaScope, which is great. I did buy it on Amazon because we have a VHS copy, but we don't have a DVD or a Blu-ray copy of it. The restoration was stunning on this. It's a complete HD restoration. All of the split screens look great. Not that they didn't before. I can only imagine how awesome this was to see in theaters because the split screen thing hadn't been used all that much up until this movie came out. And there's a lot of massive innuendos during some of the split screens, which is pretty hilarious. And we'll get into a little bit more of that. But let me just break down Pillow Talk a little bit more beyond the party line aspect. So Jan does not know what Brad looks like, and Brad does not know what Jan looks like. They just continually are fighting for time on this party line because Brad is a songwriter for commercials and movies and stuff like that, and he's trying to write new songs, but he's a little bit of a playboy as well. So every time Jan picks up the phone, every time Jan picks up the phone, he's singing this song that he wrote this girl to another girl. It's always the same song, just one of the lyrics is changed to that woman's name. Classic, of course. Yeah, 1959, 1960s, Playboy, all that kind of stuff. And of course, Rock Hudson's a very handsome guy. So this one morning, Jan is just trying to get a business call out. She's an interior decorator at this company, and she, again, like we just said, with your pick of this week of His Girl Friday, Jan, Doris Day in Pillow Talk, is a career woman. She is also a single woman that lives on her own. She does have a maid played by Thelma Ritter, who's named Alma, who's always coming in hung the fuck over, and Jan is always pouring her a Bloody Mary because she needs to get a little bit of the hair of the dog so she can do her job. Thelma Ritter is so great in this movie.
If there's anything worse than a woman living alone, it's a woman saying she likes it.
Yeah. I love that. She goes, well, what am I missing? She goes, honey, if you have to ask what you're missing, then you're missing it.
God, her lines in this movie are so fantastic.
They are. They're killer. This whole movie is hysterical. So beyond them not knowing what each other looks like, Jan's also kind of trying to fight off her friend Jonathan Forbes, played by Tony Randall. He's been married 3 times, but he's looking to get married again, and he really wants to marry Jan. Jan's really not that interested. They're just really good friends. So one night comes along where Jan is at a friend's house, and this woman's son comes home from Harvard. Her friend suggests that her son drives Jan back to Manhattan. And this young man is now just getting home from Harvard, and he's like, hey, Jan, why don't we go get a drink somewhere? But before all this, he kind of tries to molest her a little bit in the car, and she's very much about not having this happen because she's like, I'm going to tell your mother, yada, yada. If you keep doing this, then there's going to be real trouble for you. And he's like, it's crazy. Women at Harvard, I don't have to do any of this to unless it's in an emergency, which was
so
such a twisted
awful.
line.
So that was the one scene in this movie that made me very uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. So, again, all this stuff is unfortunately relevant today as well. So Jan finally relents to this young man and decides, okay, you can take me to get a drink, whatever. They go and start having drinks. This kid starts getting plastered, and he's still just trying to get in Jan's pants. She's not about it. She's like, I'm just going to get a cab. I'm going to leave. He goes, no. Just one dance, and I'll leave you alone. I promise. I'll take you home after one dance. At the same time, while this is happening, Brad is also at this restaurant, and he is sitting in the booth behind them. So he starts to recognize Jan's voice. Because, again, these two don't know what each other looks like. And, of course, Jan has a lot of animosity towards Brad because Brad is always on the goddamn party line trying to pick up women and sing to these ladies. And Jan just wants to make a couple phone calls. And I actually meant to say this earlier. Jan and Brad come to an unofficial agreement about using certain times of the phone throughout the day. So that's kind of leading up to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So Brad starts to realize that he recognizes this voice of Jan, and he realizes that, holy God, she's actually one of the most beautiful women he's ever seen. He's also out with another woman and is not paying attention to this other woman because he's now so captivated by Jan. So one thing leads to another. This drunken guy is just being a little bit too berating. He's trying to get into Jan's pants. He's not listening to Jan. Brad decides that he's going to intervene and try and save the day. He also doesn't tell her who he is. He says that his name is Rex. He's from Texas. He's visiting, and he's just visiting New York, and he's never been here before.
His name's Rex Stetson.
Yeah, Rex Stetson.
Brilliant.
Very, very funny. And he starts putting on this Texas accent. So Jan is kind of like, oh, look at this guy. He's a handsome guy. He's got this really nice accent. He's visiting from Texas. So Brad, playing Rex, starts to do what he can to kind of slowly start wooing Jan a little bit. But what he's also doing is not telling her who he is. He's playing somebody completely different. So one day they're both on the party line, and Jan's like, I'm expecting a phone call from a new guy. And he's like, ooh, who's this new guy? And I love that scene because, this is what's going to happen with this guy. He's going to take you out to drinks and dancing, and then he's going to take you back to his hotel room with an ulterior motive. And then, of course, what happens, him as Rex, he kind of does that whole thing. Leading up to all of this entertaining back and forth with Jan thinking Brad is Rex. And, of course, Jonathan, played by Tony Randall, we find out is also friends with Brad and trying to get Jan to marry him. It becomes this very interesting triangle of Brad trying to hide his identity from Jan and Jonathan because he doesn't want Jonathan to tell Jan who he is. And for the rest of the movie, we're watching all of this go down, and Jan try to figure out if maybe she's falling in love with Rex, who may not actually be who he says he is. And it just becomes a similar fast dialogue film, very entertaining, very risque as well, lots of sexual innuendo. And I love the use of voiceover in this movie, the way that we watch Brad and Jan in the same car think, their different thoughts. Just a very, very fun and also very sweet movie. Again, it's 1959, although it is considered a sex comedy, screwball comedy. I have a great time with it, and it's one of Doris Day's and Rock Hudson's highest, most favorite films that they've done together, because they did 2 other movies together after Pillow Talk came out.
Oh.
Yeah, so V, your first time seeing Pillow Talk, I think this was my 3rd or 4th. It's, like I said, it's one of my wife's favorites. She loves watching it. She didn't watch the first, 40 minutes with me, but she did finish it with me this morning. And real quick, before I ask you what you thought of this movie, V, when my wife co-hosted when you had COVID, I think almost 2 years ago, her pick was Down with Love, which is an homage to this movie.
Oh, and isn't Tony Randall in it?
I think you're right. I think he actually is in Down with Love. He has a very bit part. I think his character's name was Theodore or something like that. So, V, I'm curious, did you have a good time with Pillow Talk?
I had a great time with Pillow Talk. It's so funny. Very fun. I was reminded of several movies while watching it, actually. There's a little bit of Mrs. Doubtfire in it when he's playing the two accents back and forth when he's on the phone.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, he like clicks off as Rex and then comes back as Brad.
Yeah.
He's like, what are you doing on the phone?
He's such a jerk.
Yeah, he is.
But you gotta love him too, right? It's Rock Hudson. And then I'm also reminded of You've Got Mail because he knows who she is, but she doesn't.
Right.
And
there
so there's
go.
a little
Yeah.
bit of that as well. Very classic. I don't know if I've ever seen a Doris Day movie before.
Oh, wow.
I can't think of one, at least off the top of my head. So I was very happy to be introduced to this film. It's very witty. Like you said, the dialogue is very sharp, similar to mine. And good God, there are so many great one-liners. I think Alma is my favorite character just because she's so hilarious. And
Oh, yeah.
like the dialogue between her and Jan is just brilliant to this day. And I love how relevant this movie is and the storyline. It still makes total sense. I mean, there's a really good conversation about millionaires because Jonathan is actually a really rich person. He inherited a bunch of money and he still is a millionaire. And so there's a conversation about that I think is really relevant to this day. And at one point, Jan talks about the high cost of living and because Bruce is oh man, nobody's having kids anymore. You know, it must be because of the TVs. And she's like, no, I think it's because of the high cost of living. And I'm like, preach!
Right. Yeah. I do. That was a good line too. Yeah.
And the conversations that Jan has with Alma, she says, can you believe it? They sent a woman. That's like sending a marshmallow to put out a bonfire. And I was like, oh my God.
That was so good.
So
I
good.
love that. Oh, that's right. Yeah, because she complains to the phone company about Brad using all this time on the party line, and she wants it investigated. And of course, she sends a woman who immediately falls in love with Brad, and he's like, "Anything you need to inspect?" She's like, "You."
Yeah. And it's like in the beginning of GoldenEye when they send a woman to psychoanalyze James Bond, Pierce Brosnan.
Right.
And of course, he just hooks up with her immediately, and he passes his psych test.
Yep. And it's like in Bad Boys 2 when Mike Lowry goes to see his therapist. You're supposed to get cured by your therapist, not bang your therapist.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, gotta love tropes that still live on to this day. And Alma is actually, even though she is a bit of an alcoholic, she is also rather sage with her advice as well. Talking to Jan about how Jan hasn't kissed Stetson yet, and she's not sure. And Alma goes, well, it only takes one sip of wine to tell if it's a good bottle.
Yeah, that was good.
I'm like, I gotta use that.
Yeah.
And yeah, the chemistry between these two is great. I love the scene where they're trying to get in the car of that Harvard kid.
Oh my gosh, that was so funny.
He's so big he can't fit in the car. And that's just,
got his leg hanging out the window.
Oh, just great physical comedy. And then him, I mean, granted, he's lying to her. It's not cool, of course, but there's just so many great scenes that come out of it when he takes her on the horse-drawn carriage ride through the park. And there's that internal monologue that you're mentioning that, yes, it really works throughout this movie. I'm not usually a fan of it. I think it's a little bit jarring usually, but it totally worked in this film. And so Rock Hudson is taking her on this carriage ride and trying to act like, oh, he's from Texas. He knows all about the horses and stuff. And internally, he's like, I hope this stupid horse knows where he's going.
Yeah. And the guy that's
behind him.
Yeah, he's like, oh, I'm sure glad she's not my daughter. So funny.
God. So yeah, this movie is amazing. I had a great time. I love the ending. I think it's perfection.
Oh, the ending was so hilarious.
I was rolling when during some of Jan's scenes, and yeah, I think it absolutely holds up to this day, even though it was made in 1959.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you introduced me to it, because like I said, I don't know if I've even seen a Doris Day movie before.
Well, you're going to have to definitely make that change, because not only is this one great, I mentioned a few before, Calamity Jane is awesome, Glass Bottom Boat is one of my favorite ones of hers, next to this one. Send Me No Flowers is great. The Thrill of It All is awesome. That movie is James Garner and Doris Day. It's awesome. It's really, really, really good.
I love James
She's in
Garner.
That Touch of Mink. Yeah, she did so many movies back in the day. She unfortunately did pass away, but she lived a very long life. She died at 97 years old.
Awesome.
So
good life.
She had a really good, very good long life. And this movie actually ended up transforming her image from the girl next door to a classy, sophisticated sex symbol. So she was very happy about that.
How was she ever considered a girl next door? She was hot.
Oh, well, when you see... Oh, she was a knockout bombshell for sure. But if you see some of the other movies, like, you know, it's just like any other actor that plays a character. You know, they play like these, not necessarily uptight, but just like, and not even goody two-shoes. It's just like, you know, an every woman, basically. Yeah, just doing their thing and not really going after any man or anything like that. Just like a sweet girl next door. And this one, she comes out, you know, like claws out, and it's great.
Well, I think the costumes probably help as well, because the dresses she wore were amazing.
Yeah, the costuming was really good in this movie. Yeah, absolutely.
That white dress at the club?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. And there was a blue one that she was wearing at one point, too, that I was like, good Lord. And this was 1959, so this was 65 years ago. And it's just like, gosh, yeah, you know, still gorgeous.
Well, and unlike my movie, your movie this week is in color.
That's right. Yes, my film is in color and yours is in black and white. There's one scene where the censors almost intervened, but they didn't because it wasn't necessarily too on the nose. But there's the bathtub scene where the split screen's happening. And it kind of looks like they're kind of playing footsie with each other, but they're not really.
I enjoyed that scene. Of course, back in the day, the censors had a problem with that and not the attempted sexual assault scene by that little bastard from Harvard.
Right? Yeah, exactly. This was an interesting turn for Rock Hudson, too, because he had not done any comedies before. He had been in a lot of heavy dramas and Western films. So when he was actually contractually bound by Universal to do this movie. But when he read the script, he did not like it at all. He declined to do the movie 3 times because he felt that it was way too risky and way too sex forward. So
risky or risque?
Excuse me, risque. Yes, risque. Okay. I know, risque, yeah. Risque with a Q-U-E.
Oh, there we go. That's like milquetoast.
Yes.
Milquetoast has
exactly. Yeah. He was also worried that this film might dumb down his masculine image because of all the movies that he had done previous.
I could understand him being so worried about that piece specifically, his masculinity, because he was a closeted gay man.
Right. Yeah.
So that makes sense. And my heart always breaks for him whenever I think of his story, though, because he couldn't live his authentic self because of the time period. And unfortunately, he did
marry a woman, too.
I know. I remember the very famous, I think it was Wolf Blitzer CNN interview where he brings his wife on, his widow at the time. So this was like 20 years ago after he had died. Yeah. And she knew absolutely nothing about him. It was one of the most awkward interviews ever. Yeah.
Wow.
But unfortunately, there hasn't been much change. I mean, there are still tons of closeted people in Hollywood to this day.
Yeah, that's very true. There is. And they always put on a show that, you know, they're into women and whatnot. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, I'm a straight man, so I don't know what that's like, you know, having to really hide my sexuality or anything like that.
You should hide your sexuality, though.
I probably should. Yeah. But getting back to Rock Hudson and him being worried about this dumbing down his masculine image, Doris Day finally talked him into it, and it ended up becoming one of the biggest hits that he ever made.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I'm really excited to get into Giant. I think that movie pick of mine's coming up in like another 3 or 4 episodes. I actually forgot that he was in that movie because Elizabeth Taylor is so prominent in it, but Giant is a masterpiece of cinema, and I can't wait to get into that, and I'm excited to talk about Rock Hudson again.
Yes, I'm excited for you to pick that film as well, especially because I haven't seen that one either. I have also picked a Western epic to go along, so we just have to find a week where we can both watch about 6 hours of movies for our podcast, and then we'll have those on the show.
Definitely. It's going to be great. Michael Gordon, the director of this movie, originally wanted to get a sequel going in 1980, set 20 years later, with Jan and Brad having had a daughter who was going to get married, but Jan and Brad were divorced, and it was going to kind of play on the whole thing that they originally did with Pillow Talk, and they were both going to kind of scheme each other into falling back in love with each other. Unfortunately, it never did come to fruition because Doris Day had retired from acting at the time. I don't think this movie needs a sequel. I think that the way this one ends is perfect. It's hysterical. I completely forgot how this movie ended, so that whole thing with the doctor and the nurse is so funny early on, and well, no spoilers, but it really is a very entertaining ending, and I could see a sequel happening. and I can understand why they wanted to do it, because we'll get into how popular this movie really was for 1959 and 1960. But I'm glad that it's a standalone.
Me too. It doesn't need a sequel. I like to imagine that they just lived happily ever after and they didn't end up getting divorced. So I don't need that. However, the premise of a divorced couple scheming to get back with each other, I think is kind of brilliant. I would love that screenplay. If they would have done Ticket to Paradise with George Clooney and Julia Roberts that came out about a year or so ago, I watched it. And it was certainly on my movies you could miss list because it wasn't that great. If those two would have been in that script where they're scheming to get back to each other, I think that would have been a fantastic rom-com.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad call out to that. I can agree with you on that one.
All right, let me trademark this idea and let me write this script.
Maybe we should.
Yeah.
To promote this movie, both Rock Hudson and Doris Day ended up presenting the Best Cinematography Oscar in 1959. They were hoping that this would promote the movie, which it definitely did.
Oh, good.
Yes, and there was another director that actually claimed to have really wanted to be involved in the direction of this movie. He claims that he missed out on it, and that director was Alfred Hitchcock.
No.
I don't know, though. I mean, he's definitely known and master of suspense, but I think the reason why he felt that way was because he had an affinity for blondes with blue eyes.
Yeah.
And that was like his whole thing. So we have Doris Day being a blonde, blue-eyed beauty. I just thought that was an interesting piece of trivia to find out that Alfred Hitchcock was like, ooh, I would have liked to have directed that.
I think it's too screwball comedy for him.
Yeah, I completely agree.
That's like saying Stanley Kubrick should have directed it, and it's like, no, wrong genre.
That would have been super interesting.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, this was the first of 3 films that Rock Hudson and Doris Day ended up being in together beyond Pillow Talk. It was Lover Come Back and Send Me No Flowers. I don't think I've seen Lover Come Back, but I have seen Send Me No Flowers. That one is a very good movie. Definitely worth a watch if you have not seen that one. To our audience and to you, V.
Yes, I have not seen it.
There you go. This was on AFI's 100 Funniest Movies list.
Nice.
There's the bathtub scene in this movie that actually has been homaged in your favorite television series.
Yes, The X-Files. It's such a good homage, too. Oh, it's hilarious.
So you know about it. All right. The
Oh,
episode is titled Hollywood AD. Again, still have not seen The X-Files, and maybe one day I will.
I'm in the middle of a rewatch of it, actually.
There you go. Now, this is awesome. This movie was nominated for 5 Oscars.
Whoa!
Screenplay, music, art direction, 100% art direction.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like set design's
Gorgeous.
amazing. Supporting actress for Thelma Ritter.
Yes.
And Best Actress for Doris Day, her one and only Best Actress nomination at the Oscars.
Okay.
Yeah. It ended up winning for Best Original Screenplay.
Nice.
I just thought that was so great, especially for Doris Day and for Thelma Ritter. And Thelma Ritter's in it maybe 8 minutes out of the hour and 42. So she getting a nomination was really, really cool.
It was well-deserved, though.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Especially towards the end when she's in the elevator. I thought that was great.
She's such a mess.
Oh, yeah, big time. Yeah, and the guy's like, there's more to life than to going out and drinking all night. If you had a man taking care of you, you wouldn't have to go drinking. I thought that was pretty good. This film came out on October 7th of 1959. The budget was $1.6 million.
Okay, I was thinking around 3, especially with the set direction.
Yeah, when I saw 1.6, it's like, I kind of thought that would be a little bit more, especially because both of them were so loved at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. But they were under contract, so studios didn't have to pay them shit.
The box office intake for Pillow Talk, $18.7 million.
Nice.
Yes, it was number 1 in the U.S. box office for 7 weeks of the year 1959.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And the highest grossing film of 1959 is a past pick of mine, which I introduced you to, V, starring Charlton Heston, Ben-Hur. Masterpiece, masterpiece, masterpiece.
That's also one of my favorite episodes of our whole podcast.
Yeah, that is a really damn good episode. A lot of fun in that one.
Episode 101 for anybody who's interested.
Hey, look at that. That was a little bit ago.
Yeah.
The second highest grossing film in 1959, The Shaggy Dog. Number 3, V, a past pick of yours, starring Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis. Some Like It Hot.
Yes. Oh, God, I love that film so much.
Yes. Number 4 highest grossing film of 1959, Operation Petticoat, starring Cary Grant and Tony Curtis. So I guess I've seen more Cary Grant films than I thought, because my grandmother gave me Operation Petticoat for Christmas years ago, and I had never seen it, but it's a lot of fun. It's a good movie.
And Tony Curtis, who was in Some Like It Hot. Wow, that was a good year for Tony.
Yeah, definitely. Number 6, Imitation of Life. Number 7, another Cary Grant film, North by Northwest.
Yes.
Number 8, The Nun Story. Number 9, Solomon and Sheba. Never seen it or heard of it.
Me either.
Number 10, On the Beach. And the 5th highest grossing film of the year, 1959, my pick this week of Pillow Talk.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So that is Pillow Talk, everybody. If you have not seen it, please do check it out. It's magnificent. It's a great time. Hour and 42 minutes of your life. It's one of those old movies that holds up, like V said. It's just spectacular. I'm so glad my wife introduced it to me, and I'm so glad I was able to introduce it to V. It is available for rent on Apple and Amazon. It's $3.99 to rent or $4.99 to buy. Might as well just spend that extra dollar and own the movie because it is a piece of Hollywood history. One of the first sex comedies out there. Oscar-winning as well, and it's a very enjoyable film, and I'm glad, V, you had a great time with it as well.
I really did. Thank you so much for introducing me to it. I love any opportunity I can take to watch classic films, so thank you for that.
Absolutely. So, V, I'm curious, would you watch His Girl Friday with your grandmother?
You mean the His Girl Friday that was released January 18th, 1940, which is the exact anniversary of when you picked the front page in 2023?
Yeah.
And almost exactly the anniversary, because this episode's coming out on January 15th. God damn, that's so crazy.
That is really crazy.
Oh, God. Yes, I absolutely would. I would watch it with my mother. I would watch it with just about anyone. I don't think my sisters would really enjoy it, but I think watching it with my mom would be a really good time. And it's a dialogue-driven film from 1940. Of course, there isn't going to be anything racy in it.
Yeah.
And John, would you watch Pillow Talk with your grandma?
Yeah, I probably would. I definitely didn't, but I think my grandmother would like it. She was as much of a horror fan as she was. She did like screwball comedies and comedies like this.
I think I'd actually prefer to watch, if I had to choose between the two this week, I would prefer to watch Pillow Talk with my mother just because I know she was a big Rock Hudson fan. I mean, she did love Cary Grant too, of course.
Sure.
But I've heard her talk about Rock Hudson more often, and so I'd love to watch Pillow Talk with her.
Awesome. Well, that was a lot of fun discussing these films. V's came out in 1940. Mine came out 19 years later in 1959. One was black and white. One was color. Both very entertaining films, worth watching. Get on them if you haven't seen them. I'm excited for next week's episode because we are going to travel the unknown, the space, the final frontier. Not Star Trek, though. V, why don't you let everybody know what film you're doing next week?
Next week, we've decided to rescue Matt Damon. So we picked 2 sci-fi films with that mission. I chose the 2015 The Martian. It is based on the book with the same name. I've read the book. It's awesome. Highly recommend that as well. And if you want to follow along and watch The Martian with me, you can if you have an HBO Max subscription.
I will be watching my 4K copy of The Martian.
Oh, perfect movie to be in 4K.
Absolutely. I saw it once in theaters, and I've watched it several times at home. It is a great, great movie.
And this will be a shout out to our listener, Morgan, who recently requested that we pick a Jessica Chastain movie.
Oh, hey.
So that'll be fun to talk about.
I guess so, because Jessica Chastain is in my pick as well.
Yeah, oh my God, that's right.
As is Matt Damon, and Matthew McConaughey, and Anne Hathaway, and Mackenzie Foy, and Ellen Burstyn, and John Lithgow, and Timothée Chalamet, and so many other people. This is Jonathan Nolan and Christopher Nolan as the writers, and Christopher Nolan as the director from 2014, Interstellar. That was just in IMAX that I went and definitely saw and cried my eyes out because it is a masterpiece of space cinema. Cannot wait to discuss this movie. This is going to be the first time I have ever read any behind the scenes or watched any of the documentaries. I'm not looking forward to it, but I am, because now my world will be shattered. It is just a movie, and it was not a documentary. If you care to follow along with us and watch Interstellar, it is streaming on Paramount Plus. I will be watching my Blu-ray copy that my wife gifted me before we lived together that also contains a 70mm piece of IMAX film. I can't wait to discuss this movie.
A movie I've only ever seen once, when it was in IMAX. I
can't believe that.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to revisit it because I haven't seen it in so long.
Well, your TV is going to be awesome for it.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Sweet. Well, that is next week. Very excited for it. Can't wait to get into it. Thank you guys so much for joining us here at Movies You Miss Podcast for episode 144. Please do rate, review, subscribe, follow us on Apple, Spotify. If you leave us a review on Apple, we'll send you a sticker. Follow us on all social media. We love discussing movies with you, especially Steve and Vince and Morgan and all of you that continually message us on either Twitter or Instagram. So much fun talking movies with you guys. So with that, I think it is safe to say that we are signing off. And here at Movies You Miss Podcast, we love to sign off with film as a form of art. And in art, all opinions are valid, except if you think.
Remaking movies is a new concept in Hollywood.
We'll see you guys next week. Cheers, everybody.
Bye-bye.